Hello friends, welcome to my channel. I'm doing something a little bit different today. I have a 12 by 12 scrapbooking layout. This layout features products from Spellbinder's new collection, Storytelling. The beautiful sentiments are from the Family Die set and also from the Family Sentiments press plate set. But the star of the show is the large stitched petal bloom. This project was a great way for me to highlight one of my favorite family photos. The stitched petal bloom die set is nothing short of fabulous. It is large and it is amazing. And as the name suggests, they are stitched, but not necessarily. If you're not a stitcher, those stitching holes can be covered with embellishments. This is one of the flower centers. There are two dies, one to cut the background, and then the two together will create the detail for stitching. I've chosen a fairly muted palette because I wanted to do all of my stitching in metallic gold. I felt that the softer tones would help the gold stand out but not overwhelm the design. This die cut is made up of 7 separate sections. Each section has one point at which the stitching begins, and then the stitches will radiate out to the petal's edge from this point. I start and end my stitching with a little bit of Scotch tape to hold the threads in place. The stitch die cut will be adhered to the background with liquid adhesive. I'm first applying glue all the way around the edges, and then I'll dot it on the stitched area, giving fairly good coverage. And once they're lined up, I'll pop it under some weight so that there's good contact between the two die cuts, and I also want it to lay as flat as possible. The smaller flower center has the same concept. There is a circle die to create the background, and then the two dies are put together to create the detail for the stitching. Each stitch will begin at the center of the die cut to the outside edge of the circle. Now on to the petals. As I mentioned earlier, I'm working with gold metallic embroidery thread. It has been divided so that I'm working with 3 strands. Like the flower centers, there are 2 dies. One will produce the background piece. The other die this time though will cut the piece out on its own, creating a die cut that is smaller than the background. To complete the flower, there are 7 petals. There are 7 starting points to begin the stitches at the base of the petal. From each of these starting points, there will be 2 long stitches that will correspond to single holes at the top of the petal's edge. Except for the hole which is in the very middle. From this starting point, there will be 3 long stitches that will form the center of the petal. For all of the stitching, but in particular for these long stitches, I make sure that I pull my embroidery thread taut, not too tight. I don't want the paper to buckle, but it needs to lie flat. And as you can see on the back of this die cut, I try to work my thread in a way that reduces the amount of embroidery thread that will be at the back of the die cut. This really does help those die cuts lie flat when they're adhered to those base die cuts. As I mentioned before, I start and end my strands with a little bit of Scotch tape just to make sure that that thread is going to hold tight. After the detail die cut is centered on top of the base one, then I'll pop it under some weight. And this is repeated 7 times. So on to the last dies that are found in this set. There are 2 styles of leaves. For this layout, 5 leaves were die cut. The single outline die is used to cut the base of the leaf. To cut the detail for stitching, the stitching die is inserted in the center of that die and then run through the die cutter. These leaves are stitched quickly. There's a center point from which each stitch begins and radiates out to all of the points at the outside edge. And like all of the stitched elements, when the stitching is completed, it is adhered to the base die cut and then put under some weight until the adhesive is dry. For the layout, I'm starting off with a 12 by 12 piece of dark sage cardstock. I've cut down a creamy yellow cardstock to 8 inches by 8 inches, which will be centered on this panel. Because the panel is larger, it will be adhered using tape runner. This is not an adhesive that I use often, but seemed appropriate for this application. The panel will be etched with gold glitter washi tape that is about 1/4 inch wide. I want the corners mitered, so as I apply the tape, I extend it beyond the top and bottom edge of each side. And I'll just get that second piece in place, and then I'm going to take my scissors and cut it right down the middle, following the angle where the two pieces of tape intersect. And this is repeated, of course, for all 4 corners. This is a photo of my dad, my sister, and daughter that was taken a few years back before my dad passed away, and I just treasure it. The photograph was trimmed down to 5 3/4 inches by 4 inches and matted onto gold glitter and brown cardstock. When it is adhered to that right-hand corner, I'm making sure that the margins between the photograph and the edge of the panel are more or less the same. I'll be using 3 of the sentiments that are included in the Friends Sentiment Press Plate set. And I've popped one of them on the photograph. They were all pressed with black ink on that creamy yellow cardstock using the Better Press system. The second sentiment will go right below Family, which was die cut using the Family Die Set. Scripty word was cut from gold glitter cardstock, which has been adhered to a brown shadow die. And now for the enormous stitch petal bloom. I don't want the flower to overhang the edge of the panel, so I'm first just laying out those 3 pieces, and then I'll get those adhered in place. I want a couple of the stitch leaves to be tucked into the flower. Nothing on this panel is going to be popped up, so the leaves are going to have to be adhered first, and then I'll adhere the petal over top of them. And as you can see, I'm playing around with them a bit, making sure that I'm getting things exactly the way I want them before the petal is adhered on top. Now I'll go back to the other side of the flower, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to add in a couple of leaves first, and once they're positioned so I like the way they're peeking out from behind the petal, then I'll go ahead and add liquid adhesive to that petal and put it in place. The third letterpress sentiment is going to be adhered so that it is framed by those 2 leaves. And then that big gorgeous bloom is finished up with the last 2 petals. I think there's a lot of crossover between scrapbooking and card making design. A main focal point like this large flower really helps to draw in all of those other elements and unify them. So now we're at the point when this flower starts to look like a flower rather than a geometric shape. On goes the beautiful large center. To adhere it, I'm using several glue dots. These are super sticky and a very strong adhesive. This centerpiece is made up of 7 sections. When it goes onto the flower, each section is lined up to one of the petals. And I've also attached a glue dot to the smaller center, and that is popped into the middle. And I just love the look of this flower. I just think it's gorgeous. Keeping with my color palette, I've die cut the large bloom from Colorful Expressions Blooms. This was the large die of the month for August, and it is also an amazing die set. I've tucked in one of the stitched leaves, and then the flower is going to slightly overlap the photograph. I had a couple of these gorgeous three-dimensional sticker butterflies left over from Moonlight Butterflies, and so I thought they would be a pretty addition to the overall design. This layout will be finished up with a handful of pink crystals that have a splash of gold on them. The color of these crystals coordinates very well with the big bloom, and my final step was to take this layout with my favorite family photo and pop it into a frame. Scrapbooking is a beautiful way to preserve memories. I love working with Spellbinders Family Die Set and the Family Sentiments Better Press and Die Set. But the star of the show is definitely the stitched petal bloom. I know that this has been a little bit different for me, but I hope that you enjoyed this video, and as always, I appreciate your visit.